In this video, I'm going to be overhauling a KTM Brembo clutch slave using OEM parts. So I guess I should start by explaining what the symptoms of a failing clutch slave are. So if the clutch feels soft and you can pull the lever into the handlebars and the clutch still doesn't disengage, and also you might notice that the master fluid level is down from normal and might be down to nothing, that would all indicate that the clutch slave piston O-ring has failed and the clutch slave needs overhauling. So here you can see I've already removed the clutch slave from the bike. This particular model is a Brembo and was removed from my 2017 KTM 250 EXC. If you have a different model, there may be some differences, but largely the operation and method to overhaul is the same. But there may be part number differences and also fluid differences. So most Magura clutch slaves use mineral oil, whereas the Brembo units use brake fluid, either .4 or 5.1. So be sure to check that and get the necessary fluids and parts. So before you remove the clutch slave from the bike, be sure to clean off any external dirt. You don't want dirt getting inside while you're overhauling it. And then if I turn it over, you can see the piston here, and it has a seal and also an O-ring here. This O-ring seals between the engine cases and the clutch slave. It's not the seal that seals the fluid on the piston. The piston seal O-ring is actually inside here, and you need to pop off the piston. So one thing to note is the easiest way to remove the piston from the clutch slave housing is to use compressed air. And if you don't have access to compressed air, what you can do is before you disassemble the clutch slave is to, if the clutch lever is still working and moving the piston, is just to use that, pump the lever until the piston actually drops out. But the easiest way and cleanest way is to use compressed air and pop that out. So that's what I'm going to use, compressed air. So holding the slave cylinder down, it's a good idea to have a rag to catch the piston. There's also a spring inside, which you definitely don't want to lose. Use some compressed air and just give it a blast, and the piston pops right out. And you can see the spring there as well. Okay, so now we have the clutch slave apart. I've put some gloves on to protect my skin from the brake fluid, and we can see what it consists of. So you've got the piston here, spring, which sits inside the housing. My particular model didn't have a gasket between the clutch slave and engine case. I know some models do. If yours does, it's a good idea to replace that gasket. If we look at the piston, you saw this side before. It's got the seal around the outside. Ball in the middle, which presses on the push rod to operate the clutch when the piston moves in and out of the housing. And when the clutch slave fails, it's typically caused by a failing O-ring, which allows fluid to pass by. Okay, so now considering parts required to overhaul your clutch slave. So I went to online parts list. This one is for my 2017 KTM 250 EXC, and it listed the clutch slave unit itself, numbered 23 in this diagram, and also an O-ring 25. So I initially assumed the O-ring is the piston O-ring, but it turns out it's the O-ring that goes between the clutch slave and the engine case, and not the piston one. So if you have a damaged clutch slave, if the housing is cracked or damaged badly, certainly best to replace it, so order number 23. But if you only have a leaking O-ring, it seems quite a waste to replace the whole slave unit, especially as it's quite expensive. So I did some research online, and I was keen to use KTM OEM parts, and I found that the O-rings are available. It's just you have to do a lot of searching to find out the part number. So hopefully this video helps you guys with this. So here is the O-ring part number. I'll put the part number in the description of the video. And what you want is a 23.52 millimeter by 1.78 millimeter O-ring. And the material is very important for the Brembo clutch slaves. Because it's running brake fluid, you cannot use NBR O-rings. Here in Japan, NBR O-rings are widely available, but they will not last very long at all with brake fluid. So very important you don't use NBR. These are made from EPDM, which is very resistant to brake fluid. So it's what's recommended for the clutch slave, and this is the correct part number for the clutch slave I have. Another option is to buy a rebuild kit, and I found this at my KTM dealer. He had these in stock, and it consists of the piston assembly with an O-ring. If I flip it over, you can see the other side, and it has the seal on the other side with the ball. So that's all ready to go and install. It also comes with a new spring. So certainly if your piston is damaged in some way, or if the seal on the other side is torn, really good idea to use this rebuild kit. So I'll put this part number in the description as well, and you can see it, the part numbers listed on this sheet as well. So my particular clutch slave, the seal still looks in good shape. I can't see any tears or damage to it. And the piston looks no damage at all, no scratches, nothing. So my plan is just to replace the O-ring, and you can use a pick tool to carefully remove the O-ring. And you want to be very careful that you don't damage the seal. Okay, so now I'm ready to install my new O-ring. I've got the new O-ring there. Before you do that, make sure you wipe the piston down, remove any dirt if there is any dirt, and inspect it. So mine looks nice and clean, no dirt. I've removed all the old brake fluid. So I'm going to put the new O-ring in some brake fluid just to lubricate it, and that will help prevent any damage during the installation into the slave housing. And then just run it round and it should pop straight on. So you can see the new O-ring is installed. And you also want to clean and inspect the clutch slave housing carefully, particularly the cylinder wall. If there's any scratches on it or deposits, it wouldn't be good. On mine, it's in very good shape, but I did notice it was like a ring going round of deposits. I think it came from the old O-ring when it started breaking down and then stuck to the wall. So I carefully cleaned that off, and I ran it through my ultrasonic cleaner and then re-inspected. It looks very good, nice and smooth, no scratches. So I'm happy using this. But if yours is damaged, particularly if there's a like a vertical scratch somewhere, that's going to leak fluid. So you'll need to replace the whole clutch slave if that's the case. Okay, so I've got my new O-ring on my piston. It's all ready to go. The clutch slave housing is nice and clean and no damage. So I'm ready for assembly, and I've got my spring here as well. And before I assemble it, I've already put some brake fluid on my O-ring. If you're using a Magro, do not use brake fluid, use mineral oil. And I'm going to put some brake fluid in the housing as well, and run that round the wall of the housing, and that should help minimize any chance of tearing the new O-ring. And I put my spring in, which I'm going to put the spring into the piston, and then I'm going to assemble it this way up, and just press it down. So I'm going to check that it's aligned. And yep, that looks good. I'm going to just press down on it and it should pop in. Yep, pop straight in. And you can see the seal, when I pressed it down, it popped onto the housing. If yours hasn't, just go around carefully and install that. And then I just need to put the O-ring back. And that is the rebuild complete. And before I put the clutch slave back onto the bike, I'm going to fill the slave internally with brake fluid from a syringe and do a quick bleed. So that is full now. Got a little bit too much, so I lose a bit. But anyway, you simply fill it using a syringe and then press in the piston in the middle. And you can see there some bubbles coming out. So I got bubbles, bubbles, bubbles. Press it in and then release and press again. I'm still getting bubbles. And this gets rid of the majority of air from inside the slave and will really help with the speed of bleeding. And in this video I'm not going to do the bleed of the full system because I already have a clutch back bleeding video, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. So still getting bubbles, so you can see how much air comes out. If you didn't do this, you'd have a real trouble doing a regular bleed. It would take forever. Okay, so I've repeated the bleeding process about 6 times now, pushing in the piston and releasing and topping off with fluid. And I'm not getting any more air bubbles out, so that is fully bled and ready to reinstall onto the bike. If you have had a leaking clutch slave, I recommend replacing the transmission oil, because some of the brake fluid from the clutch system has probably made its way into the oil, so it's better to change the transmission oil. It took me quite a while to look up the part numbers for the repair kit and the O-rings, so hopefully you find that information useful. Part numbers in the description. Also, for refilling the system with fluid, recommend reverse bleeding, and I have a video which covers that, which I mentioned. I'll put a link to that video in the description as well.